Are skeptics approaching the UAP topic fairly when they demand physical proof or hard evidence of non-human involvement, as though that should be a prerequisite for even considering the possibility? Is that lack of extraordinary evidence grounds to ignore or dismiss the thousands of highly credible accounts that actually do exist? Is that really how science operates? Start with concrete proof and work backwards. Or perhaps the scientific approach to this specific kind of mystery is insufficient and physical evidence is only one means of uncovering the truth. Maybe scientists could learn a lot more from actual people, perhaps more so than all their precious instruments combined, if only they were willing to listen. Welcome everyone to UAP as NHI. The opening theme is Restore and the artist is Donbor. I'm your host, Bill Sego, and today's episode is Science is Wrong About UAP, Part 1. Perhaps a more appropriate title could have been Scientists and Skeptics Are Wrong About UAP, but that would have been a mouthful. There are three main reasons skeptics avoid the topic of UAP as if it were a plague, believing all accounts to be natural, mundane, misidentified, or hoaxed. The first is based on the vast distances between star systems, coupled with the refusal to admit there might exist some kind of super technology to develop an exotic or alternative means of propulsion that isn't conventional rocket fuel. One such example would be anti-gravity, which would account for why the craft or occupant isn't obliterated upon making the apparent erratic maneuvers at impossible speeds. The argument against this possibility is based on the laws of physics as we understand them, and the fact that gravity isn't a force in nature, rather a result of space-time geometry. So breaking any sacred human law of science is simply out of the question. Later in the podcast, I will present valid reasons why adopting this rigid position is flawed and ignores the fact that there are indeed objects in the sky performing maneuvers that suggest no conventional explanation. The second reason is they do not support the notion that aliens, specifically extraterrestrials, since that is how they refer to any potential non-human intelligence, would necessarily resemble a humanoid such as ourselves. This argument doesn't take into account convergent evolutionary theory. There are many examples on Earth where similar traits of evolution have popped up independently with no common ancestor, such as wings, stereoscopic vision, echolocation, streamlined aquatic body shape, etc., all in completely different types of animal species. Why shouldn't that also apply to potential beings on other planets out there with somewhat similar conditions to Earth? The third reason is they give little to no credence regarding anecdotal accounts and eyewitness testimony, as though neither could ever provide a single accurate account of what actually occurred, at least when it comes to this topic. That claim can be disputed on the grounds of allowing a qualitative phenomenological approach to eyewitness accounts, something people rely upon every day. It would basically suggest that skeptics be coerced to consider what it's like to experience these types of accounts from the perspective of the eyewitness to uncover common themes without having to pass judgment either way. While it would be perfectly understandable if it is suggested they accept an account as absolute fact, the error in this line of reasoning comes when they don't even consider the possibility of any such account to be accurate. This attitude is highly illogical. While human observation is certainly fallible, I highly doubt it's that fallible when interpreting something anomalous that's occurring practically in front of someone's face. While sophisticated instruments that apply the scientific method are certainly going to be more of an accurate means of deducing the truth behind a particular account, that doesn't mean that all credible cases are based on errors in observation for us to at least consider an experience to be an accurate rendition of what actually occurred. Because of this, they inject the Fermi paradox into the conversation. Quote, if aliens are thought to be so plentiful in the universe, then where are they? Since there is no concrete evidence of their presence to date, only anecdotal accounts, they couldn't possibly be here, right? This, of course, presumes that not a single report or video of UAP has already answered that question. The scientific method is undoubtedly the best tool at our disposal for understanding the nature of reality. Even though science is technically in its infancy, and the technological tools we use to observe reality will be considered primitive or obsolete in the near or distant future, it remains the gold standard of discovery for present-day human beings. But at roughly 200 years old, we should all agree there's much more yet to be discovered, and that revisions in our current understanding of the universe are undoubtedly inevitable. Even concepts we think we're pretty sure of. That being said, potential discoveries made using the scientific method are designed to retroactively transcend what we presently know. It is often effective with that approach since it continuously doubts everything and is very conservative when it comes to making claims. However, while paradigm shifts in what we claim to know are extremely rare, they do occur. We cannot escape the fact that human beings have a long way to go when it comes to solving even a fraction of the mysteries the universe has yet to reveal. We are likely not even evolved enough to conceptualize some of these ideas in the first place, and it would be the pinnacle of hubris to assume otherwise. If we can conceive of an advanced intelligence out there that has, say, 1,000-year head start on us, we can equally conceive of the fact that their knowledge about the nature of reality will far surpass ours. Now try to imagine one ahead of us by 1,000,000 years, or even 1,000,000,000. Are we really equipped to comprehend this potential knowledge? And doesn't the prospect negate the idea of us being even remotely close to claiming certainty on literally anything? Why then do many scientists refuse to admit even the possibility that there is a non-human intelligence in our presence based on the best available evidence? Evidence that in many instances would hold up against any other method of scrutiny. Physical evidence should not be the only measuring stick for deducing a truth, even if it is the best kind of evidence. Even though there are very few definites when it comes to scientific discoveries, those laws of nature may be limited by the extent of our ability to accurately measure what the test results consistently produce. In other words, they may only be useful to the extent of our current evolutionary state, notwithstanding any technological limitations. A cat is only able to perceive what its evolutionary state of consciousness allows. While those, quote, feline truths of reality may be very useful for them in their present state of evolution, that does not mean there aren't other supplemental laws of reality above and beyond what they're able to perceive or comprehend. One might then argue, well, a cat is not sentient and is thereby unable to contemplate reality in any meaningful manner in the first place. But would an intelligence 1,000,000,000 years more advanced than humanity have the right to argue the same about us? Since they would be so much more advanced than we are, would that not afford them the right to consider us less than sentient when compared to their level of consciousness? They don't even have to actually exist for us to envision this thought experiment. Forget the advanced non-human intelligence as an example for just a moment. Picture what humanity may evolve into 1,000,000,000 years from now and consider how primitive they would consider our current state of evolution, knowledge, or technology. We're unable to even contemplate what that might look like. Are we really going to argue they would be hindered by our current laws of nature or theoretical propositions that are bound within the framework of our primitive scientific understanding? I call it primitive because that's exactly what it is if we actually put our rudimentary understanding of the universe into perspective. This is where additional truth-seeking methods for contemplating a mysterious phenomenon might also be useful in order to increase our odds of making sense of all these credible reports, rather than just relying on a singular approach. At the same time, such supplemental methods to solving a mystery do not necessarily claim absolute truth, merely a level of probability, thereby can assist in moving the conversation forward. A different kind of worth should be afforded to the combined efforts of intuitive logical deduction, philosophical examination, process of elimination, and anecdotal observation of something we cannot readily explain but is nonetheless in our presence. Some mysteries of the universe may merely be beyond our current methods or means of discovery, and we may be forced to utilize different methods of seeking a truth in order to begin putting the pieces of the puzzle together now. These specific methods will be discussed in more detail following part 2 of this episode. Consider the following thought experiment. A chimpanzee, considered by many the second most intelligent creature on the planet, is unable to calculate 4 divided by 2, even though it can perform simple addition and be more drawn to a bowl with 4 treats as opposed to 2. While it may be able to deduce that more is better, it could never utilize its mind to understand anything else associated with that understanding. The concept of simple division is forever beyond its scope, yet is a very real concept that merely exists outside its view of reality. Only one species on this planet is able to make sense of such knowledge, at least as far as we know. Yet, as Donald Hoffman suggests, what might be useful for a particular species does not necessarily afford it as a true aspect of reality. For an example, an icon on your smartphone isn't a true representation of the code required to construct it, but it is certainly useful to us non-programmers as that representation. The same could be said when it comes to our visual interpretation of the world around us. We may be unable to witness the full extent of reality as it truly is, especially if one considers the subatomic realm. Does that mean then that the concept of 4 divided by 2 could never be real for the chimpanzee? No, it simply has the inability to understand or make use of it in its present evolutionary state. So it's not really much of a leap to assume there would be many aspects of reality we could never conceive of in our current evolutionary state, and we are only around 10 million years more evolved than a chimp. We can apply this line of reasoning to not only conceive of a technology well beyond our means of understanding or developing, but also to some of the innumerable anomalous objects witnessed or photographed all over the planet. We may simply lack the ability to accurately observe what the object is actually doing, let alone understand the technology behind it. Our limited sense of sight that falls within the narrow visual spectrum may not afford us this ability. While we may never understand their true function or from where they originate, that does not mean they aren't physical or real. Like the chimp, we can observe the craft, or whatever it is, and understand there is definitely something anomalous in the sky, but never understand any other concept relating to its origin, structure, or technology. It's conceivable that the technology behind some of these crafts maneuvers have nothing to do with violating the laws of physics as we understand them. We're merely unable to comprehend what it's doing, haven't the vocabulary to describe it, and lack the knowledge to ever develop it. If you took a time machine back 200 years and brought along a smartphone, imagine how academics from the 19th century would react to such a magical wonder. It would violate everything they know about the nature of reality and would completely obliterate their worldview beyond what they ever believed could be possible. They would then assume the role of the chimpanzee attempting to perform simple division. No matter how much someone might attempt to explain the principles behind this technology, it would forever reside outside their ability to comprehend. The same could be said for us today. We too are chimpanzees attempting to make sense of the technology required to maneuver such anomalous craft. Or perhaps we're on the level of a cat, or even an insect, when comparing their level of intelligence to ours. Just because we're unable to understand the technology behind it, believing it would violate the laws of nature, its very presence entirely obliterating our worldview, the object is there nonetheless, performing impossible maneuvers at impossible speeds. At least that's what some of the available evidence implies. Now, I'm not suggesting that science is necessarily flawed or that it isn't useful given our present state of evolution, but scientific reasoning applied to the idea of this particular phenomenon potentially being real, combined with our apparent lack of cognition to accurately interpret it, prevents us from thinking outside the box. A number of scientists and skeptics, on the other hand, are flawed with their approach to this topic given their preconceptions of what could and couldn't be possible within that framework of knowledge. While science works successfully as a method of obtaining knowledge that is extremely useful for present-day humanity, we may lack a comprehensive scientific knowledge base, as well as the necessary tools needed to observe and interpret a potential mystery of this type. If that isn't really the case, then what might have Arthur C. Clarke been referring to when he insisted that, quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic? He must have envisioned a technology that currently exists outside of our ability to comprehend, develop, or acknowledge as possible in the first place. A technology that would fall outside the limits we currently place on it, and one that may exist outside the ability for science to interpret in the first place. Michael Shermer, founding publisher of Skeptic magazine and executive director of the Skeptics Society, developed his own idea regarding a highly advanced civilization called Shermer's Last Law. It states that, quote, any sufficiently advanced ETI is indistinguishable from God, which certainly places it well above magic. It seems Shermer, perhaps inadvertently, is suggesting that nearly any kind of technology will be possible. But isn't that similar to reports of what is witnessed by some people and captured on video by others? Images that appear godlike and are barely, if at all, explainable are ubiquitous. Once AI develops a program that anyone could use to fully analyze these videos and eliminate instances of natural, mundane, or hoaxed objects, these pieces of evidence could indeed provide a clue to the Fermi question. Shermer also adds that the aliens should look nothing like us. Richard Dawkins, on the other hand, during the same podcast, argues that an advanced intelligence may indeed resemble the humanoid model based on evidence of convergent evolutionary theory mentioned earlier. Perhaps the humanoid model is merely the ideal form for interstellar mobility, not to suggest there aren't intelligent aliens out there somewhere who look or act nothing like us. The highly intelligent Zeta Radiculans oozing around in their gelatinous form under their methane-rich atmosphere may only lack the means or desire to build a spacecraft capable of traversing the stars. But I digress. The bipedal form may simply be the most efficient manifestation of evolution across the galaxy, a convergent model for most sentient beings, at the very least for those capable of piloting a craft. Ignoring or labeling anomalous objects in the sky as invariably having a natural or mundane explanation is an example of a flaw in the scientific approach to this topic and is thereby unscientific. Whether skeptics like it or not, there are authentic videos and credible eyewitness accounts that remain unexplained and offer absolutely no conventional explanation. They might be able to fool the average person into accepting that all cases are explainable and consistently offer a mundane interpretation, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Our current understanding of the universe is significantly better than it was just 200 years ago, but our methods remain primitive within the broader context of paradigm shifts in science that will inevitably occur in the distant future. I'm not suggesting that current scientific methodology is wrong, just that it is working with incomplete information, possibly to a negligible degree. I am suggesting, however, that the claims of some scientists are in fact wrong, and there are many examples to back up that assertion. I provide a comprehensive list of erroneous quotes made by prestigious scientists over the years in my book Universal Logic, which suggests there are likely those that continue to make similar erroneous claims today. Other academics aren't as forgiving and are equally critical of the scientific method itself. During the May 18, 2024 Theories of Everything podcast, Sam Vaknin, an Israeli professor of psychology, stated the following, quote, "Science is not about the truth. It's asymptotic to the truth. Science is the greatest failure in human history. Every scientific theory has failed. In due time, all scientific theories fail. Science is the record of human failures at attempting to use external communication or public language. The best we can hope for is to pose meaningful questions. Scientific endeavor is about posing the right questions, not about giving the right answers, because there are no right answers, and never will be, 2,000 years from now." End quote. Alternatively, there may be no deficiencies in the scientific method itself, even reflecting upon how it might be utilized 2,000 years from now. While that seems highly unlikely, we must concede that possibility. But again, there are certainly flaws made by academics that approach the UAP topic incorrectly and refuse to admit even the possibility of non-human intelligence being associated with it. The limits they place on future technology or what might be possible based on our current understanding of the universe fundamentally prevents them from even considering that as a possibility. However, they are ignoring the fact that an advanced civilization may not have to break any laws in our understanding of physics or space travel in the first place, especially if an advanced intelligence has learned how to sidestep them under special conditions. Most scientists agree there must be life out there somewhere in the galaxy, and the odds are in favor of a good number of those star systems harboring intelligent life. Since our star is relatively young, it isn't a leap to assume some of these potential intelligences would be more advanced than we are. If the origin of the UAP phenomenon is some kind of intelligence and not us from the future, not interdimensional beings from another reality, not a parallel intelligence that also evolved on Earth, or any other possible interpretation, then it should be assumed they are extraterrestrials from another star system. Regardless of what that potential source of intelligence might be, this episode will pander to the scientific community and the only possibility they will even consider. The Fermi question asks why we haven't seen any sign of intelligent life if it is suggested that it should be abundant in the galaxy. But what if evidence for it does exist in the form of UAP videos and credible eyewitness testimony? Since there is no hard evidence or smoking gun, academics immediately jump to the conclusion that there is no evidence whatsoever and hence assume intelligent life must be rare or non-existent. This assumption entirely dismisses the kinds of evidence that do exist for this possibility, at the very least that suggests there could be some type of non-human intelligence piloting UAP. Michael Shermer and other skeptics argue that humans aren't particularly interesting and Earth isn't in a particularly interesting part of the galaxy. So how would they find us and why should they be interested in the first place? That stance is working on a few assumptions itself. The first assumes an advanced intelligence wouldn't have the ability to readily detect life-supporting systems anywhere in the galaxy. If we are currently learning how to detect technosignatures or other signs of life on an extrasolar planet with only a few decades worth of technology to do so, it isn't much of a leap to assume an advanced intelligence with a considerable head start on us would have the ability to do that and so much more, perhaps harboring the technology to discover life-supporting systems across the entire expanse of the galaxy with little effort. While that comes with various assumptions of its own, if we are to assume there are potentially X number of highly intelligent beings in the galaxy, they would certainly have the ability to detect life-supporting systems much more efficiently than our current ability to do so. If an alien civilization is capable of at least narrowing down which planets are most likely capable of supporting life, it would significantly narrow down the ones they might want to expend the necessary resources to investigate. Secondly, what are Schirmer's parameters for determining an interesting part of the galaxy? Even if there is no such galactic habitable zone, we wouldn't need to be in an interesting or uninteresting region, since anyone more advanced would be able to determine if a given system could or does support life. If an advanced intelligence is able to discover that Earth is not only teeming with life, but sentient life, how on earth would that not be interesting? Pardon the pun. And thirdly, why would we assume any sentient race of beings wouldn't be interesting to any other? Have you seen how scientists act over the potential of discovering microbes on Mars? I'm sorry, but we really should be assuming the opposite to all of Schirmer's rhetorical questions. Our ability to detect extrasolar planets has exploded over just the past 30 years. In addition, the capability of narrowing down which ones might support life or exhibit technosignatures is gaining considerable momentum. If we are fast developing the ability to actually accomplish such feats, imagine what an advanced civilization could develop with an additional million years to work with. We are left to conclude that these abilities would far exceed what we could ever develop today. Whether or not such beings actually exist, this should be the logical conclusion to draw within the bounds of this postulation. While utilizing a conventional rocket-powered engine to travel to these systems would require expending vast resources, an advanced civilization's ability to detect technosignatures would narrow down the time it would take to visit these systems considerably, conceivably to less than 1 billion years in a 14 billion-year-old universe. New research indicates the universe could be twice as old. An advanced civilization might have access to vast resources that we could only dream of. If aliens are able to dispatch autonomous von Neumann machines to investigate at will, the galaxy becomes their playground, with time being the only obstacle. However, there would be more than enough time to discover Earth is an abode of life, and regardless of Schirmer's assumption, Earth would certainly be an interesting place to visit with many intriguing prospects. The assumption that space travel relies on early 21st century Earth-based technological capabilities to expend resources for investigating nearby systems is another faux pas. So is assuming that intelligent life would be hindered by the vast distances that are presently a major obstacle in space exploration for us. In other words, we aren't in a position to justify making such proclamations, since the evidence that does exist in the form of UAP would give us an equal right to assume just the opposite. Both suppositions cancel themselves out if we were to consider the possibility they might already be here based on the overwhelming amount of potential evidence that does exist in support of non-human visitation. We don't have to know one way or the other to allow that to enter into the conversation as at least a valid possibility. No outlandish propositions required and no leap of faith necessary. Along similar lines of reasoning, we could also assume the technology for interstellar mobility would likely be exotic given enough time to develop a means of propulsion that must eventually succeed conventional liquid fuel. This assumption is equally supported by observations and credible video evidence of objects in our atmosphere performing enigmatic maneuvers. If they're able to seemingly disappear and reappear from one location to another, as the anecdotal testimony or video evidence suggests, travel at impossible speeds exhibiting no signs of conventional propulsion, or perform sudden maneuvers that would obliterate any occupant or conventional craft structure, they would most likely utilize a form of propulsion entirely unrelated to conventional rocket fuel. While the old school concept of fuel-based propulsion need not be entirely eliminated from the conversation, the available evidence that supports such claims suggests a power source likely much more exotic, much more powerful, and much more efficient. Just to reiterate, this line of reasoning is based on the assumption that NHI are extraterrestrial in the first place, something this entire argument is pandering to in order to point out the flaws in scientific reasoning that are based solely on arguments against the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The biggest conclusion to be drawn from these thought experiments is that, while it's okay for scientists to posit such impossibilities and support that position based on existing technologies, it might be more sensible to avoid relying on our current knowledge of physics and technology as a basis to effectively eliminate the possibility for ETH. The fact that there are a vast number of credible reports, many of which remain unexplained, a flaw in their overly skeptical line of reasoning emerges, which should coerce all of us to at least consider the possibility of current visitation by unconventional means. The reasoning behind it is solid, thereby at the very least suggesting the ETH is a valid possibility. We should at minimum entertain the prospect without eliminating possibilities that scientists readily assume are impossible based on our current primitive understanding of physics and technology. It's as simple as that. There's nothing wrong with postulating the unlikelihood of such technologies, but there is certainly something wrong with eliminating the alternative from the conversation altogether. This, of course, relies on the good faith assumption that neither side claim absolute certainty, since any extraordinary claim should be left out of the conversation. By also claiming that human engineers will never develop an alternative means of propulsion appearing to violate the laws of physics, scientists eliminate one of the biggest alternative explanations to some of the best UAP accounts. If such impossible maneuvers are also not the result of some secret technology the military, government, or private contractor has developed, that narrows down the list of potential earthly explanations. It would force skeptics into a catch-22 should the day come when AI is able to definitively prove a video of an object displaying such impossible maneuvers is not mundane or a hoax. Or perhaps skeptics would ignore the efficacy of such a program and claim such videos are just as circumstantial as anecdotal accounts, even though video evidence is considered demonstrative evidence that can actually corroborate an eyewitness claim. While an image captured by a camera can fool our senses based on a number of factors, an effective program designed to expose those misidentifications would eliminate this problem. A promising sign for the future of this technology is Intel's deepfake detection tool called FakeCatcher, developed in 2022 with the ability to detect a fake video with a 96% accuracy rate. This is just one example of a program with this capability. Someone will eventually incorporate similar software for these specific purposes, which might lead to only two possible explanations for a given video: NHI, or a classified technology kept from the world's scientists for decades that appear to violate the laws of nature as we know them. It will be interesting to see how skeptics might react to a program able to authenticate an account with 99% accuracy, because that day will soon arrive. I suppose in the meantime, skeptics are helping to narrow down the list of mundane possibilities by eliminating human involvement for any type of alternative propulsion. That means if a video showing a craft to be traveling at impossible speeds, making impossible turns, and showing no resistance to air or water is proven to be authentic or unaltered, they will have a hard time arguing that it must be us using some type of secret advanced technology that defies the laws of physics. Would they dare contradict their prior claim that we couldn't develop this capability either? Or would it be the only remaining excuse, thereby forcing them to retract their prior claim? The only logical alternative is that it would have to be a non-human intelligence that isn't limited by what we humans consider to be impossible. This would mean we should never again hear skeptics or military personnel use the ridiculous excuse that it could be a secret Chinese balloon or Russian drone. While such claims are understandable for instances where an object is clearly mundane, they should never be used to explain an image or account of something unexplainable or anomalous. That's all for this week's episode, everyone, and I hope you'll join me for episode 4, Science is Wrong About UAP, Part 2. Be sure to like and subscribe to help the channel grow so that I can get the message out to a broader audience. Also be sure to visit uapasnhi.com. If you're listening to the podcast version and wish to bask yourself in the glory of my presence, I can also be found on YouTube at UAPasNHI. Thanks so much for your support. The following quote was made by physicist Andrew J.H. Clark and David H. Clark, Ph.D., in 1999. Quote, "There is a deep skepticism among many scientists over the possibility of interstellar travel. Frank Drake has been particularly vehement in his criticisms of supposed sightings of UFOs, as was Carl Sagan. However, we believe their cynicism is misplaced in terms of relating the fundamentals of science to the possibility that extraterrestrial intelligence will have the capability to travel between stars."